May 14th, 1804, 33 men and 1 woman had left St. Louis, Missouri. Their mission to cross a continent that no American had ever crossed. No maps, no roads, no idea what was ahead of them. They were going into territory that Thomas Jefferson had just bought from France, without anyone in America knowing what was in it. It took them 862 days. They traveled more than 8,000 miles. They crossed the Rocky Mountains in September, when the passes were already filling with snow. Their guide got lost. Their horses fell off cliffs. They began to starve. They survived grizzly bear attacks, flash floods, frostbite, near starvation. Mosquito swarms so thick they blocked out the sky. And when they finally returned to St. Louis on September 23rd, 1806, only 1 man had died. 1 out of 33 in 862 days, across 8,000 miles of unknown wilderness. How? Welcome to old American ways. Before we go back to 1804, if you love the real stories of Americans who survived what should have killed them, subscribe right now. Hit like if that number, 1 death out of 33 in 862 days of unknown wilderness, hit you differently than you expected. Share this with someone who thinks Lewis and Clark is just a chapter in a history textbook. It was the greatest survival expedition in American history, and almost nobody knows what it actually took to survive it. Now, let's go back to the beginning. May 1804, St. Louis, Missouri, and a president with an impossible dream. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson made the greatest real estate deal in American history. He bought the Louisiana Territory from France, 828,000 square miles of land for $15 million, about 3 cents per acre. The problem was, he had absolutely no idea what he had bought. The Louisiana Territory was not empty land. It was home to dozens of native nations. It contained the Rocky Mountains, which Jefferson imagined as modest hills, like the Appalachians. It contained the Great Plains, the largest grassland in North America. It contained rivers, deserts, mountains, and ecosystems that no American scientist had ever documented. Jefferson needed to know what he had bought, so he chose his personal secretary, a young army captain named Meriwether Lewis, and gave him an impossible assignment: find the Northwest Passage, a water route across the continent to the Pacific Ocean. Document every plant, animal, and mineral you encounter. Map every river and mountain. Make contact with every native nation, and come back alive. Lewis chose his friend William Clark as co-commander, and they spent the winter of 1803 to 1804 assembling their team. 33 men total, soldiers, hunters, interpreters. A man named York, William Clark's enslaved servant, who would become one of the most important members of the entire expedition, and later, a 16-year-old Shoshone woman named Sacagawea, who was carrying a 2-month-old baby when she joined them. They called themselves the Cause of Discovery. On May 14th, 1804, they pushed off from Camp Dubois near St. Louis and headed up the Missouri River into the unknown. Let me tell you what they faced, because the Lewis and Clark expedition was not a pleasant camping trip. It was 862 days of situations that could kill you if you made one wrong decision. The first major danger was the Missouri River itself. The Missouri in 1804 was nothing like it is today. It was wild, unpredictable, filled with hidden sandbars, submerged trees, and banks that could collapse without warning. the keelboat nearly sank multiple times. In August 1804, Sergeant Charles Floyd died of what historians believe was a ruptured appendix. He was the only member of the Corps to die on the entire expedition. There was nothing Lewis could do. He had medical training, he had medicines, but a ruptured appendix in 1804 was a death sentence. Even today, it can be fatal without immediate surgery. Floyd died in present-day Iowa. He was 22 years old. They buried him and kept moving. The second major danger was the wildlife. The American West in 1804 had a wildlife density that is almost impossible to imagine today. Lewis described grizzly bear encounters that would stop anyone's heart. In May 1805, Lewis shot a grizzly bear. The bear kept coming. Lewis ran. He jumped into the Missouri River. The bear finally turned away. Lewis wrote in his journal, with the kind of understatement only a 19th century army captain could manage, that he considered grizzly bears a most formidable animal. The Corps was attacked by grizzlies repeatedly throughout the expedition. The third major danger was the Bitterroot Mountains. In September 1805, the Corps attempted to cross the Bitterroot Range in Idaho. Their Shoshone guide, Old Toby, got lost. The snow was already deep in mid-September. The men had grown accustomed to eating 5 to 7 pounds of meat every single day on the game-rich Great Plains. In the Bitterroots, there was almost no game. They began to starve. They killed and ate their own horses. After 11 days in the Bitterroots, men were collapsing from exhaustion, hypothermia, and starvation. When they finally descended to the land of the Nez Perce, the Nez Perce fed them and saved them. Now let me tell you what actually kept them alive, because it wasn't luck. The Lewis and Clark expedition survived because of 4 specific things. The first was preparation. Lewis spent a full year preparing for this expedition. He studied medicine with the best doctor in Philadelphia. He learned botany, astronomy, and cartography. He loaded the keelboat with medical supplies, trade goods, and enough food and ammunition for years. He thought through every scenario he could imagine. The second was native knowledge. This is the survival fact that most history books minimize. Lewis and Clark survived because of the knowledge, the hospitality, and the direct assistance of dozens of native nations. The Mandan and Hidatsa peoples sheltered them through the brutal winter of 1804 to 1805 at Fort Mandan in North Dakota. The Shoshone provided them with horses to cross the Rocky Mountains. Without those horses, they could not have crossed. The Nez Perce fed them when they were starving in the Bitterroots and showed them how to build the canoes they needed to descend the Columbia River to the Pacific. The Chinook peoples along the Columbia River taught them how to survive on the Pacific coast. Without native assistance at every single stage of the journey, the Corps of Discovery would have died. The third survival key was Sacagawea. Sacagawea was not just a translator, she was a living signal of peace. As Lewis noted, a woman with a party of men was a universal sign that the group was not a war party. Without Sacagawea, many of the native encounters that kept the Corps alive would have been hostile instead. She also recognized landmarks in her homeland, guiding them through the Rocky Mountain passes she had crossed as a child before being kidnapped. She found edible plants when they were starving. She rescued critical journals and instruments when a canoe capsized. She was carrying a 2-month-old baby the entire time. The fourth key was Lewis's medical skill. Lewis had studied medicine for 2 months before the expedition. He treated wounds, infections, venereal disease, and the constant physical trauma of 8,000 miles of wilderness travel. His treatments weren't always correct by modern standards. He bled patients, a common practice of the era that we now know did more harm than good. But he kept the men functional. He kept infections from killing people who would otherwise have died. Preparation, native knowledge, Sacagawea, medical skill. Those four things are why 32 of 33 men came home. On November 7th, 1805, William Clark wrote in his journal 3 words that defined the entire expedition. Ocean in view. He misspelled it. He was so exhausted, so overwhelmed, so moved that he couldn't even spell ocean correctly. But there it was. The Pacific Ocean, 18 months after leaving St. Louis. They had done it. They voted on where to spend the winter. The first recorded Democratic vote in the history of the American West. Every member of the Corps voted, including York, including Sacagawea. Neither of them had the right to vote in the United States at that time. York was enslaved. Sacagawea was Native American, but Lewis and Clark let them vote anyway. They built Fort Clatsop near present-day Astoria, Oregon, and they spent the winter waiting for the weather to clear so they could begin the 4,000-mile journey home. The return trip was faster. The rivers were flowing with them now. They split into 2 groups to explore more territory. And on September 23rd, 1806, 862 days after they left, the Corps of Discovery arrived back in St. Louis. The crowd that met them had assumed they were dead. They had been gone so long with no communication that most of America had given them up. But they came back, 32 of 33, with journals documenting 178 plants new to science, 122 animals new to science, detailed maps of the entire territory, and knowledge of dozens of native nations that no American had ever possessed before. What they brought back was not just maps and specimens, it was the blueprint for American westward expansion. Within 40 years, the Oregon Trail was open. Hundreds of thousands of settlers followed the exact routes Lewis and Clark had discovered. The American West as we know it today was built on the survival of 33 people in 862 days. 33 people, 862 days, 8,000 miles, 1 death. That number, 1 death, is the most remarkable survival statistic in American exploration history. Not because death was unlikely, because death was everywhere. Grizzly bears, freezing mountain passes, starvation, unknown diseases, flash floods, hostile encounters that could have gone wrong in 100 ways. And only 1 man died of a ruptured appendix, something that kills people even today without surgery. The Corps of Discovery survived because of preparation, because of native knowledge, because of Sacagawea, and because of the medical skill that Lewis had worked so hard to acquire. But there is one more thing: they survived because they trusted each other. 33 people, soldiers, civilians, an enslaved man, a teenage mother, men of different backgrounds and abilities, who made a decision to act as a unit, to not leave anyone behind, to solve problems together. That is the deepest survival lesson of Lewis and Clark. It wasn't individual heroism that brought 32 of 33 home. It was the collective, the group, the decision to survive together. This has been Old American Ways. Subscribe if these survival stories matter to you. Share this with someone who thinks Lewis and Clark is just a chapter in a textbook. And tell me in the comments, which survival fact surprised you most? Old American Ways, where the past is never truly gone.